In a red state, we passed paid time off, paid sick leave, paid maternity leave,
Yeah,
and they
yeah.
was like, "Nah, we're not giving you that. We don't care if you voted for it. We're gonna reject it." And that's exactly what they did in Missouri, and they say that we're a democracy, so we don't get what we want. We Americans don't even support Israel. We don't support sending never-ending money to Israel, but we get it anyway. So
Yeah, you
people
get
need to
anyway.
stop pretending. That's why people like Bernie Sanders and AOC piss me off so much. You have these social democrat scum. They're like, "Oh my God, we got to fight Donald Trump to save our democracy," pretending that
So, yeah, exactly.
we have someone who I greatly appreciate, a global scholar, scholar, man. That's how I see it. Writer, political advisor. Thank you back. Thank you for joining us on RBN. You're a friend of the show. It's great to have you back on, John.
Thank you for having me. I always enjoy chatting with you.
Yeah, absolutely, and especially I like to talk to people and across the seas, international people, because I to widen my perspective. Like the American left, like many of these brainwashed Americans bore me, so I'd rather talk to people in China, people in Russia, Europe as well. So it's great to have you join us once again. I want to ask you about this conference because I've been following the Trump administration, which is essentially doubling down on the policy of the Biden administration. And Pete Hegseth, and guys, I can't stress this enough. The Biden administration was doing the same thing. Pete Hegseth was going around to Asian countries and telling them to increase their military budget and be prepared for the rising threat of China. and then they had this Asian conference, and essentially all these countries came together, and it was like, "Nah, we're good. We're gonna continue to keep working with China." But I know you've been following this event. You got a lot of perspective about what's going on in the region. Can you share what's been going on with this Asian? Am I saying that right? This
Yeah,
conference
it's the
that
Shangri-La dialogue. Yeah.
yeah. Can you
Yes.
explain what was discussed, the reaction from many of these Asian countries in response to the United States pushing conflict against China? Are they siding with the United States? Are they following the route of people like Japan, South Korea? What exactly is going on in Asia,
So
John?
this is the sort of most well-known, the quote-unquote premier security dialogue in Asia Pacific. I refuse to call it the Indo-Pacific, but in which I think the main participants would, of course, be the ASEAN countries, the 10 countries of Southeast Asia. But of course, the elephant in the room is always the adversarial relationship between China and the U.S. So the U.S. is there and China is there, usually at fairly senior level, and that's why this is important. This year, I think it was quite instructive, the way in which Hegseth, despite all the America First proclamations earlier on about a different foreign policy, basically recapped Biden. It's truly instructive how little they are able to depart from that program. I think it's surprising even to skeptics like myself. So if you remember, early in the administration, just a few days after they all got in, we had this Munich Security Conference, which is Europe's equivalent of this. And Hegseth and Vance, Rubio went out there and shocked the Europeans, remember? And basically at that point, they were saying,
yeah,
the US is going to pursue America first, right? Trump's marching orders to Rubio were, you are going to implement America first. And what was the difference with America first? There were some basic principles there. In particular, sort of the buzzwords or keywords, common sense and pragmatic, meaning we would not be ideological. It would not be a war to the end of democracy versus autocracy, these overblown Manichaean things, right? Which, of course, have no resolution. We're going to be there for America first. So Hegseth actually came with a script like that in Singapore, where the Shangri-La Dialogue is held every year. And then he sort of hit the notes saying, it's going to be a new era in American foreign policy. It's going to be common sense. It's going to be pragmatic, focus on U.S. interests, right? But if you look at the outcome of what he was talking about, and what he basically did was ratchet up the risk of China starting a war on over Taiwan, basically likened Taiwan to Ukraine, and spoke about set it up so that it was just a repeat. It was just a kind of Biden administration all over again. In fact, Biden's previous Assistant Secretary of State for the Indo-Pacific said exactly as much as, wow, this is great. This is just like what we did, right? So it's amazing. It was just neocon central all over. With I tweeted and I said, look, this is just the same stuff coated in MAGA glitter. So extremely disappointing, I would expect, for anyone serious from the America First side. And there are serious people, maybe a small bunch of them. Somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene, you might think, who would buck the trend and say, look, we need to focus on America, right? We need to not get entangled in useless wars. Well, I'm sorry, you are on your way to getting entangled in the mother of them all. Yeah. So that's where we are. That's where we are. It's like an amazing recap of Biden policy. It's just neocon.
I explain to people all the time on how United States foreign policy doesn't change. Between these ridiculous puppets in the suits. People really thought that Donald Trump, a reality game show host, clown, who went bankrupt multiple times, he was going to be the guy.
There's going to be one change, though. There's going to be one change. No more pride flags flying from the American embassy. Okay, so that. Okay, we're not going to force this agenda on you guys. But for the rest of it, as far as war and peace are concerned, it's business as usual.
Yeah, hope the right wing establishment stays in charge, because if there's ever this giant war that's going to pop off, all I gotta do, if they try to draft me, all I gotta do is tell them I'm trans and I'm good. You guys realize, because of the Trump administration, we have the best draft dodging excuse of all time now. So that's the only difference. Just like you said, it's a neocon agenda without a rainbow flag, and they're banning trans people.
Right? Yeah, it was Pete Hegseth's right. Peace through strength, right? It's a really creepy 1930s sounding thing. Peace.
Yeah, that's Reagan ideology.
Oh, it's more than that. Yeah, So, but it was basically peace through full spectrum dominance, right? We're going to have peace, and I think one of it was to make sort of any challenge impossible. You're just not going to have that. The Chinese economy. People talk about a status quo, and China is upsetting or wanting to overturn the status quo. Since 1989, do you know how many times larger the Chinese economy is today than it was in 1989? 56 times.
That's crazy.
It has done this, right? I said your status quo is 56 times buried, right? And this was done without a single shot being fired, unlike every other empire that we know of. And so, of course, it's going to be militarily more powerful. It's, of course, economically more powerful. The question is whether the region can handle this dynamically, keep some sort of balance so that everyone feels safe. But if you want to stuff this back in the bottle, we're a long way from 1989, 1991, whichever your preferred sort of date for, that sort of American supremacy is. Whatever you look back to longingly, it's gone.
Yeah, I always find it weird whenever there's like Americans who are extremely pro-capitalist, pro-Americans. We're the richest country ever, and we have massive homeless populations.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
have
Who do
our
you think
system's so far.
benefited most from that 56x thing? Yeah. The US financial class. Apple, for example, right? They talk about all that outsourcing, but the profits were in the largest measure made in by Western companies and in the US. And China willingly underwent that in order to get to someplace else. Right?
Yeah.
Even today, the proportion, the percentage of the value of an iPhone that China gets is minuscule, right, compared to the rest of it. The value from selling it, from the final sale of an iPhone, most of it goes into both the US IP and the distribution and so on and so forth. It goes to Apple. China gets what, $30 from it? And of course, it's going to be taxed for the whole amount of that, right? If or tariffed, so to speak, if unless Apple had an exclusion. But this is how it goes. And that game is over, right? Because China is climbing the value chain, and that's in effect the biggest threat to a certain type of capitalist financial capitalist class.
And I have no idea what the leaders in the West is doing, because you have Trump and these American first clowns. They will say, we are going to have a new era of American prosperity, and we are going to compete with China, as they continue to fund the military budget to $1 trillion, and they cut spending on infrastructure. Like
Yeah,
the Trump administration, they canceled high speed rail. They're not investing in our society at all.
yeah.
While at the same time, they're saying we're going to compete with China. How, sir? How are you going to compete with China when you're cutting education, when you're
Cutting
purposely cutting
education.
investment into your society, while China is investing more than ever? Do you guys see
The
the
bedrock, the absolute bedrock, right? It's no big secret of China's competitiveness is education.
Yes. Don't they
It's
got like 9 out of the
education.
top 10
It's,
universities?
in the end, right? It goes to that, right? And you're cutting that, then how are you going to compete? By continuing to pull these coercive measures and hoping people will conform to it, which they won't. I think today we heard not even the Japanese are negotiating with them. So it's a different world now. How much
Yes.
did how much did Doge save us? How much did Doge save compared to the increase in military budget? Right?
It's funny you mentioned. I was gonna mention. I have a segment. I may do it a little bit later about how Doge is complete failure, and
Yeah,
even Elon is admitting it. He like fuck.
yeah.
Like he accomplished nothing. Hurt his
Accomplished
reputation. Now
nothing.
Tesla is struggling.
Yeah, yeah,
Elon has been a massive loser in this situation. Like it's very weird how it kind of played out.
yeah, yeah,
I got more receipts and more detail later, but the
yeah.
Pentagon budget is $1 trillion. We have some fucking bill that's about to explode the budget even more because they are obsessed with funding the police more. They sending a ton of money to cops who are already making a record amount of money. While they're cutting Medicaid, they cutting
Right.
Social Security. I know
Medicaid. That's
friends
right.
who already told me that they received half the amount of money they received last month. It's already happening, guys. As they
Right.
increase in the police budgets, as they increase in the military budgets. And the question is, this is not me just being a bleeding lefty. I'm a crazy communist radical. The question, if you're an American patriot, even if you're not a socialist, even if you're not a communist, how the hell does this help the United States compete with China? Do I have to say like a fucking neocon
Yeah.
to break through?
Exactly. They're not even doing MAGA well.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah. Let's keep it really minimal. Let's keep it to, let's say, what Marjorie Taylor Greene, right? Or Thomas Massey are saying. Not
yeah,
exactly bleeding lefties, right? No, I don't think if those people are serious, then they will know they've been, you know, uh, they've been betrayed, right? And any hope they had. So I think this was significant because this was the first time the Trump administration set out its foreign policy in East Asia, and this is what it looked like. It's not very encouraging. Of course, they could switch over the next day. I mean, but that's just that just adds to the trouble. They're just very, very unpredictable, erratic, and that's part of a kind of a sense of increasing weakness.
Yeah, and the erratic part is
Yeah,
part of the
yeah,
strategy. They call it strategic ambiguity, and they
yeah. You might
purposely,
think, yeah. We had
yeah,
a lot of that over the tariffs. Oh, Trump
yeah,
is playing 4D chess. Until you realize it's a lot of it, I'm sorry to say, was just cluelessness or just stupidity, right?
yeah,
Yeah, you couldn't think your way around some of those moves. Yeah. I think part of that was you had different factions wanting different things out of it, and it was a hodgepodge, and the result was, yeah, the end result wasn't good.
yeah. So the thing is, it was completely incoherent. so
It
so
was incoherent.
completely
Yeah.
incoherent. They would say, "Well, we have all these trade imbalances, so that's why we put on the tariffs." And then the
Right.
next second later, they would say, "Well, we put on tariffs because of fentanyl."
Right.
Then the next
Right.
second, they say,
Right.
"Well,
Right.
we put on tariffs to bring jobs
Yeah.
back home." Which
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
is it?
Yeah.
You can't have three different goals like that, and
Yeah.
you have to be targeted. You have to have a strategy. Like,
Yeah.
go ahead,
Hexeth
go ahead.
was in Singapore, right? Saying, we've neglected Asia in the past. Phew, thank goodness if you had. Of course they hadn't, but it was as if it was like 2010 or something. Remember the Obama pivot to Asia, right?
Yeah,
No, no, that cat. I mean, he's the one actually who shifted after, tried to move the things away from the Middle East, back to after a decade of pointless wars, ruinous wars in the Middle East. Let's focus on China now. Let's focus on containing China. But Hexus was there speaking as if they were the first to do this and said, look, we're not going to be distracted by wars elsewhere, Middle East and Europe, etc. And now we're going to focus on Asia. How credible is that? The US is now even more distracted than under Obama. Or even, I mean, you are now in middle of a raging war in Ukraine that could go even go nuclear after the recent escapade, and then this horror show, this genocide in Gaza. So
yeah,
you are really, really very far from being able to focus on Asia. So coming there and putting that stake out and saying, okay, we're going to focus on you now at a time when your credibility is at the lowest and US power, actually straight up hard power relative to China, is lower than than ever before. You want to come and do this? It just doesn't look credible. It doesn't help your own side. you know
yeah.
Cooperation would be better. Multilateralism would be better. Coming there and saying, look, what kind of trade deals can we strike? How can we come to some sort of accommodation, right?
Exactly.
There are ways out, but there wasn't the imagination for that.
What you said there sums up my politics in a nutshell. Cooperation. You
Cooperation.
realize that I am considered an extremist in my country. People consider me an extremist, and people say, "Oh, Nick, why are you a Putin puppet? Why do you apologize for the Chinese Communist Party?"
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Motherfucker, my position is that we should
Yeah.
cooperate with them."
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't have.
Yeah.
Do you see any Putin
Yeah.
posters in my background?
Exactly.
I don't have like a poster of G in my. I'm not a fan. I'm saying it's best for humanity for us
Yeah.
to cooperate with the Chinese and the Russians and the Iranians and the Venezuelans instead of making them our enemies, because that only benefit the ruling class who benefit off of conflict. And if you
Yep.
study history, this is clear. This is
Yep.
clear after centuries of human history, where
Yep.
peasants died fighting the wars of the lords, where people who used to conspire in the ruling class to start wars for profit. How can people study history? How can people witness humanity for centuries and not realize that these conflicts do not benefit us? They will
Yep.
tell us stuff like the ruler is a god. Like they'll believe the king is a god, right? And the king, whoever they go into war with, the people they go into war with are people who are inherently against God. This is how they used to sell war to people back in the days. Back in the mid uh, middle of Europe during the war that came between England and France, when the white people in Europe used to kill each other all the time. If you're against the king, you're against God. So as humanity, you would think that we would be wiser now, that we would learn from mistakes of our ancestors. And after seeing how the ruling class sold wars generation after generation after generation, when will we as a collective humanity start rejecting it? And I reject it, and I'm essentially unhireable because of that. Because people say, "Oh, Nick is anti-American. Nick won't cheer on the enemies of the ruling class." It's a psychosis that we reject in the Arabic community. But John, anything you want to add on? And I want to get to the Trump Palantir story.
No, I suspect a lot of Americans agree with you. You know,
sure.
I think it's worse than during Middle Ages or feudal times, because in feudal times you knew that you didn't have a say in it. They were taking you to war anyway. Now you have the pretense of democracy. Tell me which of these wars has had popular support. Nothing gives the lie to liberal democracy so much as this constant resort to war. Poll the population. They don't want it. And yet, war after war, they get dragged into it. So I think it's worse.
That's a great point, John. Actually, that's a fantastic point. I didn't really consider it. I remember, like, when you study history, like, I got my anti-war positions because not only because I went to school during the war on terror. That's when people were like, Nick, why are you focused on foreign policy? How do you guys don't? Mm-hmm. Do you guys not see what Bush did to the Middle East? That was a very important moment in terms of me being interested in world events. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was in the States at the time. Yep.
Yeah. So I don't know how people don't focus on these never-ending conflicts, and especially seeing how they hollowed our communities out. I was against the Afghanistan war from day one, and if only our country would have made a different decision, because while we was trying to replace the Taliban and got the Taliban, China was investing in their infrastructure. China built high-speed rail. Russia became a global superpower. You have the world that moved back past us as dumb Americans were cheering on where we got to destroy we got to destroy Afghanistan. So are we going to learn from our mistakes or not? But John, I'll give you the last word, and then I'll move to some stories.
You and I just want to encourage you, right? You and I are made to feel like we're some crazy radicals, some fringe radicals.
Yeah.
And actually, that's only in the media, and that's only in their circles.
That's a great point.
I'm pretty sure in the rest of the country, a lot of people feel like us.
That's a great point. It's also an important point to make.
You just never get that heard. Yeah.
Because I also mention all the time how we are actually a capitalist dictatorship, how we actually don't get what we want in voting. Like, you guys know that in Missouri, they just rolled back all the ballot initiatives. So the one actual act of democracy we do have in the United States, in a red state, we passed paid time off, paid sick leave, paid maternity leave. And they was like, nah, we're not giving you that. We don't care if you voted for it. We're gonna reject it. And that's exactly what they did in Missouri. And they say that we're a democracy. So we don't get what we want. Americans don't even support Israel. We don't support sending never-ending money to Israel, but we get it anyway. So people need to stop pretending. That's why people like Bernie Sanders and AOC piss me off so much. You have these social democrat scum. They're like, oh my God, we got to fight Donald Trump to save our democracy. Pretending that
So, yeah, exactly.
I'm glad you got why I was getting with that. Because, like, how are you a progressive talking about defending our democracy been garbage?